Okay, good afternoon and welcome back, everyone. So, before the break, we discussed how to prepare the risk assessment assignment. We discussed all the parts. And during the risk assessment, what the most important thing you need to consider is the hazards and the control measures. So, this information will be available to you guys from these slides that we are going through now. Last week, we covered element number 5. Today we're going to cover element number 6 and try to cover element number 7 as well, and maybe if possible 8. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to skim through these slides. Okay, we'll only focus on the hazards and the controls. Okay, because that is the key information that you need for carrying out the risk assessment. If you guys have any questions, any queries, you can post a question on WhatsApp, or you can call me, or you can contact me in any way, and I will help you clarify those questions, and I will respond to your queries. Okay, so IG2 element number 6. This discusses about musculoskeletal health. Musculoskeletal health, as it is obvious from the name, it comes from the muscles connecting the skeleton. Okay, so it deals with the health issues related to your musculoskeletal structure, the soft tissue which connects your joints, which connects your bones to each other, which connects your skeleton. That is called musculoskeletal structure, and we're going to discuss about the musculoskeletal health hazards in this presentation. Okay, so now the most common issues related to musculoskeletal health are work related upper limb disorders. Okay, now the upper limb, your body is divided into two parts, the upper limbs and the lower limbs. The upper limbs include the part of your body above your belly button, your above your middle of your torso. For example, your arms, your hands, your elbows, your shoulders. These form your upper limb. Then there are lower limbs, which are lower limbs are your legs and your feet and your ankles, etc. So we're going to discuss about work-related upper limb disorders. So basically, musculoskeletal disorders (MSDs), it's a collection of injuries to the skeletal system and the soft tissue associated with that system. Okay, the most common health issues related to musculoskeletal disorders are back injuries, back pain, sprain, damage of the ligament or disc injury, WRULDs or work-related upper limb disorders. These are common musculoskeletal issues. And then there are chronic injuries of your soft tissue, such as from continuous sitting, standing, or kneeling for long periods. These are the musculoskeletal disorders which can affect the health of the workers. Okay, what are the most common high risk activities that are exposed to musculoskeletal disorders? People who use DSE, display screen equipment. Why? Because they are continuously focusing and looking at a certain place. They are maintaining a certain posture for a long time. So they are exposed to musculoskeletal injuries. Keyboard operation, repeated typing, repeated press, repeated motion, that causes extra strain on your muscles, your ligaments, and it can cause you serious injuries. A lot of people who use that, what you call it, computer, and they use the keyboard for a long time, they are mostly exposed to a health condition called the carpal tunnel syndrome. Okay, that affects a lot of people who use the keyboard, who have repetitive use of their fingers. Then people working in factory assembly of small components. So what happens in factory assembly? You have to do a lot of repetitive movements. So you have to do the same thing all day. So that repetitive movement, it can cause serious injuries as well. Supermarket checkout operation, again, you are standing there all day, twisting and turning, and awkward posture. These can cause musculoskeletal injuries, and also bricklaying as well. So all of these are high risk activities or repetitive operations which can cause musculoskeletal disorders. Then there are ergonomic hazards. What is ergonomics? Ergonomics is basically the branch of science which deals with the interaction of the worker or the human with his work environment. Okay, so how you interact with your work environment, how much is your seat height, how far is your keyboard from you, how far is your display screen from you, how far are the other controls from you. So how you interact with your work environment, your workplace, that falls under the ergonomic hazards. Ergonomic hazards basically include poor posture. If you're sitting too long in a awkward position, it can cause you injury. So poor posture is a hazard. Prolonged sitting is another hazard. If you keep on sitting for a long time, your blood circulation will be interrupted and you might get health issues from that. Repetitive work, that's also another ergonomic hazard. You keep on doing the same thing, and for example, you have to keep on typing all day, or you have to keep on doing the same work all day. That is also an ergonomic hazard. DSE, display screen equipment, that's a very, very big hazard. Bending or twisting while you're doing your work, manual handling, prolonged pushing and pulling. So all of these are ergonomic hazards, and they can cause serious injuries and ill health to the workers. So basically, the principle of ergonomics is that you need to match the workplace to the individual's need, not the other way around. The individual should not be required to adjust to the work environment, but the work environment, that should meet the needs of the individual. Okay, you have to design the workplace in such a way that it meets the needs of the person, so that he does not go through discomfort while doing his job. So ergonomics is concerned with the interaction between people and the tools and equipment and machinery they are using, the workplace environment, and other organizational factors. So, who are the people who are at risk of being harmed from ergonomic hazards? We have DSE users, people who use DSE, which is display screen equipment. So, people using laptops, people using monitors, operators who are working in control rooms, control panel operators, market workers, operators, manual workers. So, these are all the people who are exposed to ergonomic hazards, and they can get injured from it. What are the risks? WRULDs, back pain, eye strain, fatigue, and stress. Control measures are to make sure that you have a comfortable seating, your work environment is adjusted to fit your requirements, your chair and table should be aligned properly, your screen top should be in line with your eyes, your legs should be slightly bent, you should be able to adjust your chair height, adjustable chair height options should be there, you should have lumbar support for your back. So all of these are the control measures. Additional points, you need to make sure the desk layout is done in such a way that it is suitable for the person carrying out the job. You should provide document holders so people can hold the documents that they are typing. Workplace lighting should be sufficient, and telephone headsets should be provided when required. For laptops, obviously, you need additional measures. For example, you cannot do long work on a laptop. It should only be used for a short duration. You should be also be given a docking station, a station where you can permanently sit and you can have carry out your work. Regular breaks should be given, and regular eye tests should be conducted as well. Other DSC control measures include an entire workstation assessment, which assesses the suitability of the workplace or the workstation. Provide basic DSC workstation equipment to minimum standards. So the workstation equipment that you provide, the table, the chair, the DSE, the screen, and everything, it should be up to a certain standard. Plan the work routine, make sure you have a proper plan and you don't do things randomly. Eyesight tests and spectacles are to be provided free if required. Provide information and training on the risks of DSE, what are the preventive measures or the control measures of DSE, and what is the ergonomic use of the workstation. Next is manual handling. Manual handling is another activity which can cause musculoskeletal disorders. Manual handling is basically the carrying, lifting, carrying, pushing, and pulling of a load by bodily force. So if you're doing any of these things, it falls under manual handling. If you're lifting a load, if you're carrying a load from one place to another, if you're pushing a load or pulling a load, or you are using bodily force, that is called manual handling. What are the common types of injuries that happen because of manual handling? You can get back injury. You can have a prolapsed disc. Your spinal cord, it consists of small bones which are called discs. So if you have prolapsed disc, that can be very painful. Tendon and ligament injuries, muscle injuries, hernias, WRULDs, work-related upper limb disorders, cuts, burns, dislocations, and broken bones. Okay, so whenever we are handling any load, we need to take care of the proper manual handling techniques, or it is also known as the kinetic handling techniques. So you need to follow this rule that number one, before lifting the load, you need to check the load, plan the route of the carry, where you will carry the load from and where you'll carry it to, establish a firm grip. Number two, in the lift, you need to bend the knees and use the leg muscles to lift the load. Never ever use your back to lift any load because your back will crack. It is not good in compression. The compression elements in your body are your legs, your thighs. Okay. So make sure you bend the knees and use the leg muscles to lift the load. Keep the back upright. Your back should be straight. Keep the load close to the body. Avoid twisting, overreaching. Finally, when you set it down, you need to use the same principles during lifting. Maintain a good balance. Set the load and then adjust it to the position where you need it at. Now, whenever you assess the risks from manual handling, you need to consider more four factors at least. So these four factors are also called TILE, T-I-L-E, TILE. T for task. So you need to consider the task factors. Is the manual handling task repetitive? Is it for a long time? Is it for a short time? So you need to consider the task factors. You need to consider individual factors. The person who is lifting the load, whether he's well built or whether he's a small individual. Does he do exercise? Is he physically fit? Is he trained properly? Is he competent to lift loads or not? So individual factors need to be considered as well. Then you need to consider the load itself. How heavy is the load? If it's too heavy for a single person to lift, you cannot lift it. You'll get injured. So you need to think of alternatives. You look at the size of the load, shape of the load is also very important. Whether the load has any place to grip or not. Okay, are there any sharp objects on the load? So you need to think about all these things. And finally, the environment, is there adequate lighting? Are there any other distractions? So these are the things that you need to consider while carrying out a manual handling risk assessment. For the task as discussed, you need to look at the height of the load, repetition of the task, carrying the carry distance, how long you need to carry to, stooping, bending, twisting, rest breaks, vertical height, above shoulder height, and overreaching, etc. These are the risks related to the task. Then the risks related to the load include the weight of the load, the size of and the bulk, the stability of the load, center of gravity, grip, is it hot or sharp, etc. So all these are factors you need to consider while these are the load factors that you need to consider before handling. Then finally, you need to consider the environment. You need to consider the space restrictions, change in the floor level. Is the floor condition slippery or uneven? Are there adequate lights? Temperature, it should be adequate, and humidity should be less as well. Avoiding or minimizing manual handling, very important. Again, obviously, as I discussed, whenever you propose any control measures, you need to look at the hierarchy of controls. In the hierarchy of control, what's the first thing you need to do? Try to eliminate the work. Okay, try to eliminate the hazard. That will reduce the risk directly to zero. So eliminate, obviously you can't eliminate manual handling permanently. So then you need to assess, determine whether it is safe to do the manual handling or not. Then use handling aids if possible, modify the task, modify the load on the environment, and finally match the individual's capabilities to the activities, which means you need to make sure that you don't ask a weak person or a small or a meagerly built person to lift heavy loads. Okay, heavy loads should be lifted by people who can carry them or by mechanical means. Okay, then avoid or minimize the manual handling risk. You can further do this by automation of the task. You can mechanize the task, conveyor belt systems, provide forklift trucks, pallet trucks, cranes, and hoists, etc. You can also use other aids such as trolleys, barrel lifts, gin wheels, trucks, hoists, and lifts. Okay, so how to avoid or minimize the risk of manual handling? So you need to address all the four factors. Number one, the task. Make sure the tasks you're doing related to manual handling, you need to take regular rest breaks or job rotation, eliminate the stooping or twisting, and use table lifts as well. So this is how you can modify the task. Then the load is there, smaller loads are easier to lift, reduce the load so that they are easy to lift. Make sure the load is stable, it shouldn't be very high. Mark the center of gravity, and the center of gravity should not be high. If the center of gravity is high, there is a more chance of the load falling over. If it is low, then there is a less chance of the object falling over. Attach handles to the load if required, and obviously you need several workers to do this. The environment, you need to arrange the workspace, level uneven floors, and give additional lighting. And for the individual, you need to make sure the individual is the matching of the individual and his capabilities to the load lifted. Then we have load handling equipment. Load handling equipment are in various forms. You can see cage, platform, two-wheeled, pallet trucks, and trolleys, etc. The hazards included in load handling equipment are manual handling risk. You need bodily force. Instability of the load, moving up or down axle or across slopes. This can be very, very dangerous. Poor parking, that can be very, very dangerous, especially in the case of forklift trucks. Other pedestrians may be struck. This is very, very key point as well. That is why whenever we are using load handling equipment, forklift trucks, etc., we must always provide segregation between pedestrians and vehicles. Okay, if you keep them together, definitely there will be an accident. So pedestrians and vehicles, they should be separate. Okay. Um, Trapped feet, that can be an issue with boom trucks as well, and with other load handling equipment. Then we have trapped person behind the, what you call it, behind the trapped person being handled. So these are all issues related to load handling equipment. So you can have your feet, they can get trapped. The people using the load handling equipment, they can be trapped as well. So these are the hazards of load handling equipment. What are the controls? You need to use trained workers only, follow the manufacturer's recommendation, avoid uneven grounds, use ramps or steps, safe working load, secure the load, use the brakes, make sure you need to have the brakes in a working condition, care when moving or lowering the load, safe parking and storage, routine inspection, and safety shoes or boats should also be provided. Forklifts are also another very, very common load handling equipment. What are the most common hazards of forklift trucks? Number one is overturning of the truck, falling of the load, striking pedestrians, which happens often, falling or entrapment of a person riding on the forks, and the fall from the loading dock. So these are the hazards related to forklift trucks. Okay, what are the control measures? Obviously, restrict the usage. Don't allow everyone to use it, and make sure that the usage is minimal. Visual inspection to be carried out before usage. Make sure you carry out routine maintenance, regular preventive plan. Preventive maintenance should be there, PPM. So PPM is planned and preventive maintenance plan. Preventive maintenance should be carried out on all equipment, especially forklift trucks. You need to use proper working platform to lift people. So you should never lift people with forklift truck. If you do want to lift them, you need to use a proper manpower lifting platform. Secure the and make sure the load is stable. Make sure the safe working limits are provided and they're not exceeded. Speed limit should be adhered to, otherwise there is a chance of falling over. Never travel with the forks raised, and never travel if your obstruction vision is obstructed. Then there are battery operated trucks. They have their own hazards and precautions. Battery operated trucks are dangerous because there is a risk of explosion from hydrogen gas. So whenever we charge the batteries of a truck, it gives off hydrogen gas. And if there is inadequate ventilation, it can form a combustible or explosive mixture with the atmosphere, and it can explode on a minor spark. Arcing, shocking, shock, burns, or fire. These are also related to battery powered truck. Environmental hazards are there, such as the battery when it is old, you need to dispose it off. So that becomes a common hazard because it is usually hazardous. The batteries, they contain acid and they are hazardous, so they can damage the environment. What are the precautions? Obviously, make sure that the batteries are charged in a well ventilated area, adequate ventilation is there, and there should be no ignition sources near the battery charging. Use PPE when handling acid, mechanized battery handling, and protect yourself using electrical safety, such as insulated tools and gloves, etc. Okay, next is diesel powered trucks. Diesel powered trucks, they can cause dermatitis, slipping hazards, environmental pollution, toxic exhaust, and bulk storage. Precautions are that the diesel powered trucks should be used in well ventilated areas, spill kits should be available, and gloves should be used while handling the diesel. LPG power trucks, their hazards are explosion from the LPG, toxic exhaust fumes, manual handling and storage of LPG cylinders. Precautions are used in well ventilated area. So don't use LPG trucks in an area where there is poor ventilation. You need to provide good ventilation if you want to use LPG trucks. Mechanize LPG cylinder handling. This is also very important because LPG cylinders can be very, very heavy and can cause you back pain, injuries, manual handling injuries as well. And you should store the cylinders separately. Okay. For example, the LPG cylinder should never ever be stored near the oxygen cylinders. Why? Because if there is leakage of the LPG, there is leakage of the oxygen, it makes a very combustible mixture and explosion can happen like that. So you need to store and secure the cylinders, make sure everything's safe, well ventilated location as well. Let's move to the next slide. Lifts and hoists, obviously, they are also a dangerous piece of equipment. The hazards involved in lifts and hoists include falling objects, being struck by the load, entanglement in moving parts, falling from height, being struck while riding on the platform of the lift, on landing levels, any parts of the enclosure and other projections. They can be devastating if you get struck by them. Okay, what are the precautions for lifting hoist? You need to provide a suitable lift and hoist for the intended use. Prevent people getting underneath the hoist. Never ever allow people stand underneath the hoist or walk underneath the hoist because the load or the hoist can fail at any time and it will fall on them. Access to unprotected landing edge should be available. Struck by landings or other obstructions when being carried on the work platform. So when you're being raised or being carried to the work platform, you can get hit by structures here and there. Maximum safe working load should be followed and you should never exceed it. Safety devices should be installed on the lifts and hoists, such as the SWL alarm. So if you reach a certain capacity, the machine should, the lift or the hoist should give an alarm so that you know that the limit has been reached. Competent persons should be available, provide proper information, instruction and training, routine maintenance and routine inspection and thorough examination. Okay, then there are conveyors. Conveyors have their own hazards such as drawing in and nip points are there where you can they can draw you in, entanglement with rotating parts, falling objects such as from a overhead conveyor. Precautions, obviously, you need to make sure that there is an alarm to warn the people at the start of the movement of the conveyor belt so nobody gets entrapped or stuck in it. Guardrails should be provided in all moving parts because they are very, very dangerous. All moving parts should be protected. Emergency stops or pull cords should be available at various locations. Exclude the people from the area. Don't let other people work in the area when conveyors are operating. Make sure that the guards are available beneath the overhead conveyors to catch any falling objects. Give proper information, instruction, training to the workers. Loose jewelry, clothing not allowed, and make sure inspection and maintenance is carried out for the conveyors and report any defects. Okay, what are the crane hazards? Crane hazards obviously include the crane collapsing or toppling over, the arm or the boom or the jib which can strike other structures, falling off the load can fall from the crane, the load striking objects or people, the load with live overhead cables, contact with the live overhead cable. So this is a very, very common occurrence. Sometimes what happens is that people, they use cranes to lift the load, and while lifting they come too close with electrical cables. Okay, and there have been many, many incidents, many fatalities because of this issue. Okay, just 1 second, guys. Okay, what are the factors causing instability in a crane? Number one, overloading. You must never ever exceed the load mentioned on the load radius chart. In every crane, there should be a load radius chart which tells you how much load you can lift at how much radius, what would be the boom length, what would be the angle. So you need to make sure that you understand all of these things. Make sure the ground is not unstable or uneven. Outriggers not being used properly. Use in high winds, that's another factor causing instability. Extending the jib or boom too far, and any structural failure as well. Okay, so what are the requirements, safety precautions for lifting? Number one, you need to make sure um, suitable for the task and appropriately rated. Okay, so the lifting equipment that you're using, they should be appropriate to the work or activity that you are about to do. Equipment should be safe, stable and secure. Make sure that the load is safe working load is visibly marked. Lifting operations planned properly and carried out and supervised by a competent person. Equipment for lifting person may require additional inspection. So these are things you need to consider for lifting activities. You need to plan and prepare the lift, make a risk assessment, check the records, train the operators, and make sure the correct correct equipment is used for the train. Okay, you need to make sure that you carry out the lift after careful sighting, use of outriggers, plan and supervise the lift, make sure banksmen or signalers are available, overload indicators should be working, check the weather conditions, use PPE, warning signs, attach slings carefully, carry out a gas test, and carry out a test lift so that you can understand that whether the load is going to be lifted or not, and guide the load using taglines. Okay, guys, that's the end of this element, which is element number 6. We discussed about ergonomics, MSDs, DSE users. We discussed about WRULDs, and we discussed the factors to consider while carrying out a manual handling risk assessment as well. We discussed about risk associated with manual handling, lifting, we covered that. We also discussed different types of lifting and moving equipment, typical hazards, general precautions, and explained how you should inspect the equipment as well. So this was the end of element number 6. Element number 7, I'll just quickly go through the hazard and control. I'm not going to go through all the slides, okay? Let me just share with you. Element number 7 is related to chemical and biological agents, okay? So there are various chemical and biological agents which you can face in the workplace. They could be solid, They could be dust. Dust is suspended solids in the air, fumes, gases, mists, vapors, liquids, and fibers. So chemical agents can be in all of these forms. Then there are biological agents. So chemical agents were solids, dust, fumes, gas, liquid, and biological agents are funguses, bacteria, viruses. One of the most common biological agent which has spread havoc around the world these days is the coronavirus, COVID-19. That is a biological agent. Other biological agents include HIV, hepatitis, Legionnaires disease. Obviously, it is called by bacteria called Legionella. Then Leptospira, that is also bacteria. Also fungus, it can cause farmer's lung as well. Okay, so basically, I've discussed this before as well. Whenever any health effect happens, there are two types of health effects. There are acute health effects, and then there are chronic health effects. Acute health effects are short term health effects. They happen after high levels of exposure to any certain health agent. Um, it is basically a short exposure of time. So you are exposed to high levels, high dose, and it can happen for a short period of time. You can have a very, very small exposure, short exposure, and still get affected and get acute health effects. These are also called quick health effects, and they are often reversible. You can get better from them. For example, exposure to high concentration of chlorine gas. You will feel uncomfortable, but slowly it will get better. Then there are chronic health effects. These are long-term health effects. These basically don't go away very easily. They are caused by low-level exposures for a long duration of time. So if you're exposed to a certain health agent for a long period of time, you can acquire chronic health effects. Chronic health effects are irreversible most of the time. You cannot recover from chronic health effects. Okay, so acute are short term and easily recoverable. Chronic health effects are long term and not so easily recoverable. Okay, classification of chemicals. We have physiochemical agents, health effects and environmental effects. Routes of entry, and it could be through inhalation, breathing it in, ingestion, absorption, or injection. Then there are defense mechanisms. You don't need to go through these. Respiratory systems are there. You need to, yes, one of the control measures, you need to assess the health risks. When you do a health risk assessment, you need to understand the hazardous nature of a substance, potential ill health effects which can result, physical forms, which forms does it exist in, what are the routes of entry and quantity, what concentration the people are exposed to, how many people are there, what is the frequency of exposure and how long the exposure lasts, and what are the control measures in place. Product labels, this is a very, very important control measure to help control hazardous chemicals or dealing with hazardous substances. So we need to know the on the product label, there should be the name of the substance, hazardous components of that substance, any risk phrase which indicates the danger of that substance, and the precautions and details of the supplier. Safety data sheet, also known as MSDS, material safety data sheet. So SDS, safety data sheet, and MSDS, material safety data sheet, are the same one and same thing. So the outline the information down here. This is basically a toxic hazard. This is a toxic hazard. Okay, safety data sheets, they should include the identification of the substance and supplier. It should include what are the hazards of that substance, the first aid measures and firefighting measures. It should include what to do if there is an accidental release, handling and storage, exposure to controls. We should know about its physical, chemical properties, stability, toxicological, ecological information, how to dispose it of, transporting it is also under controlled manner, and any legal requirements as well. Okay, occupational exposure limits. This is a very, very common terminology which is used to monitor our exposure to hazardous substances, hazardous chemicals. Now, the human body, it can bear certain chemicals up to a certain level. Beyond that level, your body will not be able to bear, and you will get health issues, and you will get, illnesses, or you might get physical injuries as well. So basically, these occupational exposure limits, they say that you cannot be exposed to a certain dosage of a chemical, okay? Because after that certain limit, you will start feeling its bad effects, okay? So they are used around the world, and there are many different occupational exposure limits. In UK, they call it the workplace exposure limits, which basically set the limit of exposure that cannot be exceeded over a given period of time. The work exposure limits, they have a legal status, and under the COSH regulations. COSH regulations are the control of substances hazardous to health. Okay, what is the definition of work exposure limit? The maximum concentration of an airborne substance averaged over a reference period to which the employees may be exposed to. Okay, you don't need to remember these short-term exposure limits. Now, this is important. What are the control measures? The control measures, number one, prevention of exposure is the best. So eliminate the substance, prevent exposure. If not possible to prevent exposure, you need to adequately control it, ensure the work exposure limits and occupational exposure limits are not exceeded. Um, then also you need to make sure to minimize the emission, consider the routes of exposure, make sure the controls are appropriate to the risk, choose effective and reliable control measures to deal with this issue, use PPE, check the control measures regularly, inform, train, and make sure that the new control measures do not increase the overall risk. Okay, how to control exposure? Obviously, elimination or substitution, try process change, try reduction of exposure times and segregation. Make sure you provide a LEV system, local exhaust ventilation system. Dilution ventilation should be available. RPE should be provided, and other PPE, personal hygiene and protection regimes should be followed, and health surveillance should be carried out. Health surveillance is a very, very important way to deal with the exposure to the chemical or biological agents. Okay, so elimination or substitution is the best way. Most of the time, it's not always possible, but you can do it by outsourcing the paint activity to an expert, change the work, okay, dispose of what of the stock is not wanted or unwanted stock, substitute hazardous substances with non-hazardous substances, change the process, apply solvent by brush instead of spraying. That is another very good control measure. If you spray paint, it is suspended in the air. Very easily, it can be inhaled by people and they can get injured. But if it is painted by a brush, there won't be any vapors in the air. Okay, reduced exposure is also very, very important. So you need to remember the rule of thumb, double time and double the dose. So if the dose is increased, you can automatically consider that the time of exposure has also increased. Or if your time has doubled, it means you have received a double dose. So make sure you minimize the time period over which people are working with hazardous substances. Don't allow them to work continuously full day with hazardous substances, and make sure this exposure is linked to OEL. Okay, enclosure and segregation is another control measure. So you can totally enclose a substance, prevent access to it, keep people away, and design designated areas. So this is a typical local exhaust ventilation system. Here you can see that the guy is cutting wood on a bench saw, okay, and he has proposed a hood over it. He is using a hood. This hood is basically a safety device, okay. Um, then this hood basically connects to the main duct. The main duct then goes through the filter. At the bottom of the filter, there is dust collection bags, and at the far end there is an extractor fan which extract all these particles, the dust generated by this grinding activity, and it throws it off into the atmosphere. Okay, local exhaust ventilation, it will be reduced by poorly positioned intake hoods, damaged ducts, blah, blah, blah. So this is not important for you, so I won't run you through this. Then respiratory protective equipment should be provided. Respirators, obviously, there are respirators which filter can be contaminated by air from the atmosphere around the wearer, and breathing apparatus, also known as SCBA, self-contained breathing apparatus. It provides breathable air from a separate source. Other PPE include hand protection, eye protection, and body protection. Personal hygiene and protection measures are very, very important to follow, especially nowadays with COVID-19. You need to keep on washing your hands regularly, careful removal and disposal of PPE. Do not use other people's gloves or other people's PPE. Prohibition of eating and drinking in smoking areas. Provision of washing, changing, and facilities and restaurant food preparation. Okay, then there are various vaccination programs which we need to implement. Nowadays, we have vaccination program going on for COVID-19. So I hope all of you are tested for COVID-19, or hopefully you are vaccinated as well. Okay, so you need to get vaccination about some other hazards as well, such as hepatitis B virus. You can get vaccination, tetanus, typhoid. Obviously, you cannot forcefully vaccinate anyone, so you need their consent, and immunity should be given to them as well. Then there is health surveillance, very, very important control measure to monitor the chemical and biological agents. So basically, health monitoring, it looks for signs and symptoms of the disease. For example, bakery workers, they have a lung function test to check for asthma because of the flour dust that they inhale every day. Biological monitoring looks for the contaminated blood, urine, or breath, and basically it will check the level of various substances in your blood. So regular tests are conducted. Screening is done to establish a baseline, and then you carry out tests to understand how much damage, how much ill health the workers have gone through during the course of their employment. Then there are certain specific agents which we use, such as asbestos. Asbestos is used in cement roofs, ceiling tiles, fire break walls, floor tiles, down pipes, used in pipe, what you call it, lagging. The diseases it can cause include asbestosis, lung cancer, mesothelioma, and diffuse pleural thickening. Hepatitis B and C are also viruses which are very dangerous. They are transmitted through the blood and bodily fluids. The people at risk are the healthcare workers, people who work in hospitals, doctors, nurses, etc., firefighters, police, waste disposal people. The symptoms of hepatitis B and C are related to jaundice and liver damage, and it can be a chronic disease as well. Then there are typical control measures for hepatitis. We need to wear PPE, gloves, eye protection, disposal of the material which has been used in the clinic, prevention of needle stick injuries, disinfection or decontamination, vaccination, and oxygen procedures as well. Then there is carbon monoxide. Carbon monoxide is a byproduct of partial combustion. It happens in poorly maintained boilers. It poses an inhalation hazard, and it prevents red blood cells in transporting oxygens. It can cause chemical asphyxiation at levels of 0.00. Then at this percentage, you get more headache, and at high levels, which is up to 1.3%, rapid unconscious and then death, similar to H2S. How do we control it? Make sure there are competent engineers, maintenance of boilers to be done, proper ventilation, LEV system to be provided, sitting of equipment containing combustion engines, carbon monoxide alarms, and confined space entry controls should be implemented. Another common chemical or hazard which we use on site is cement. Cement is very, very dangerous. It is used to make mortar and concrete. The harmful effects are it will cause irritation in the eyes, respiratory tract, and the skin, and it can cause burns and dermatitis as well. Cement control measures, you need to eliminate or reduce the exposure. Don't let cement sit on your skin. Provide PPE, gloves, dust masks, etc. Remove contaminated clothing and make sure you follow good hygiene. Another agent is Legionella. Legionella is basically a soil-loving bacteria which infests water systems. We need to make sure that we carry out regular cleanliness to make sure that we prevent the increase of Legionella. So what are the controls? Obviously, risk assessment, written control scheme must be available, procedure should be available, and a responsible person should be nominated. What are the practical controls that we can avoid water temperatures between 20 to 25 degrees? Because this is the temperature where the Legionella bacteria thrives. It reproduces. So this Legionella bacteria, it needs a suitable temperature, and you need to make sure that that temperature is not provided to it. Avoid using material that can harbor bacteria. Control the release of the water spray, and use the water chemicals if required. Carry out sampling, etc. as well. Then there is Leptospira. Leptospira is a bacteria found in rats, the urine of rats. So infected rats or animals which are carrying this bacteria, this will be present in their system. Mostly mice, rats, horses, and other cattle. They contain this bacteria. Okay, it can contaminate the water, and the people who come in contact with that contaminated water, it can obviously them as well. Most people who are at risk are dairy farmers, sewage workers, and water sports instructors. It causes flu-like symptoms, jaundice, etc. You don't need to remember these. The typical controls are the same: prevent rat infestation, make sure you have good pest control system, proper hygiene, washing hands, PPE, covering cuts, etc. Then there is silica. Silica is a naturally occurring material. It is a component of rock found in quarries. It can cause an inhalation standard. Silica basically exists in the dust form in the form of fibers. Those fibers, when you breathe them in, they get stuck in your lungs and they cause scarring, and this scarring is called silicosis. Okay. Controls are obviously to find an alternative work method, dust suppression, LEV, and RPE, etc. Then there is wood dust. Wood dust has the same issues, causes irritation and asthma. You can control it by using LEV system, vacuuming, providing respiratory protective equipment, and self-surveillance. Okay, guys, so that's the end of element number 7. So I think we have covered enough for today. So element number 6 and 7 are completed. The remaining elements we will cover next week. And what you must remember is that you need to make sure that you have the hazards and controls, so that those hazards and controls, they will help you in carrying out the risk assessment. And remember, nothing from IG2 will come in your IG1 exam. IG2 is only for your risk assessment. Okay, guys, so any questions related to these two sessions that we have conducted today? Do you have anything to ask?
No, it's fine.